So in my opponent's first argument is that she says that what I'm saying about her information is false and all my sources are uncredible. When Columbia Reports is arguably the most credible news source coming out of Columbia because they are their head reporting agency for the entire country. Also, the Washington Times is also an extremely credible website for news information, so they're not going to go out there and risk their credibility just for one debate and one argument. They're going to go out there and make sure everything that they're saying is true. And also, she did not mention at all in her entire video about the power vacuum that would happen in the case that we stopped funding the Colombian government. She not at once said that if we were to stop funding the government, that the police force would fall and they would have no stable government because there would be no way to fight back against the soldiers of FARC. And that's a point that she just completely overlooked entirely and stuck to one or 2 points the entire time instead of looking at my entire speech so far. My opponent also brings up in her video that the civilian lives would be endangered if the fighting continues, but then she makes the mistake in saying that most of those lives are soldiers and rebels. Well, if you look at it, soldiers and rebels aren't civilians, and they know what they signed up for. If you join the military, you know you're gonna go in there and fight, so you're no longer a casualty. You run the risk of dying because that's what your occupation is. And if you're a rebel, you're willing to die for your cause anyways. So I don't see them as a civilian casualty. I see them as casualties of war. And those are two very different things because if the civilians die, yes, that's a tragedy because those are casualties of civilian life, those civilian casualties. And thus, something needs to be changed. But if it's soldiers and rebels fighting, then it's not really civilian lives are not in danger because most of them take place in jungles and in the forests of Colombia. So there's really running unless some civilians just so happen to be out there. They're not running the risk of really killing any civilians. Only when they get into urban combat that they should heighten up their security and make sure that they don't accidentally kill civilians. And in that case, and so then also she then proves my point correct because I'm said that these are soldiers and rebels, and then she agreed by saying that roughly the 2,000 people that have died since 2000 to 2015 have been mostly soldiers. So then she's proving my argument right, and if my opponent says my argument right, I'm pretty sure I'm right. The news group that my opponent brings up, the NACLA, the National American Congress on Latin America, is a small, politically motivated website in which their agenda is pretty clear that they are very pro freedom in Colombia and freedom in all of Latin America from oppression. That's all good. But because they are so hardcore in their beliefs and what should happen in Latin America, they run the chance of skewing their numbers and making their headlines a bit extreme purely so that it promotes their agenda and how hardcore they want this stuff to pass. And so obviously movements like Plan Colombia, which help a government that's trying to stabilize its country and they don't want that to happen, they could skew their numbers to make their government look bad in hopes that their agenda gets passed and everything that they want can become better and everything that they want can improve. But there is also the chance that they're lying. She says they're a credible source, and I would take a look back because they're very small and they really aren't well known. And if you're pretty small and well known, then your credibility could take a shot. And if you're as hardcore as they are, not objective like most credible news websites are, then you run the chance of showing your extreme bias and skewing your numbers to promote your agenda. My opponent again brings up how the cops in Colombia are out there killing civilians again to continue to inflate the numbers to receive more donations. And she also brings up how Washington has said that the plan itself isn't working, but she doesn't say who in Washington has said it isn't working. And then that runs the chance of there being someone in Washington who's against this plan, saying these things just to make it look bad, to smear it, to run their own smear campaign. So basically, they can't really hold water because it's not really true. And then she mentions no sources at all on when she finds that information. And again, also, the rebels could be camouflaging themselves as civilians. So if that happens and they camouflage themselves as civilians, then they could lead to confusion and people thinking that they are civilians when in reality you're out there killing the rebels and you're out there killing their rebel leaders. Thus helping them fight back against the soldiers of FARC who are not good people, who all they want to do is terror, torturize, and abuse this country for their own personal gain. finally, I just bring up a lot of the arguments my opponent brought up are not true, and not only are they not true, they don't make a lot of sense. She's saying that there's going to be a catastrophic collateral damage and a humanitarian disaster in that country, but that's not true because they don't nerve gas anymore, like I said last time. And so if they don't nerve gas anymore, and if the Din Corporation is keeping hold to what they're saying and trying to protect their public relations, then I'm pretty sure I'm winning this argument because there's no way that she could be right and that there's going to just be a massive humanitarian disaster where millions die if there's not really that threat. And so in the end, I think I'm more right. I would like to say I'm entitled to winning this one because it's just there's no way you could win by throwing out saying that humanitarian disaster, which would mean millions of people are gonna die, to happen if in the last 15 years only 2,000 people died, and most of them were soldiers who knew what they were signing up for.